The filmmaking community this morning woke up with some great news. RED, the big cinema giant, announced price drop on two of their most popular cameras, the RED Komodo OG and the RED Komodo X. You can now buy the OG Komodo for $1,000 cheaper, and the RED Komodo X is actually $3,000 cheaper. That's about 30% discount. And get this is not a temporary discount. This is a permanent price drop. So which means that you don't necessarily need to buy it right now, the camera. We don't know what's gonna happen. Maybe they're announcing a new camera and these cameras are gonna be out of stock, and then you're not gonna be able to get one unless you get it used. For many filmmakers, the Komodo X is a dream camera. But the question remains, can it shoot weddings? I mean, after all, weddings is the backbone of the filmmaking industry. Many filmmakers started in weddings and then transitioned into commercials, documentaries or film. And perhaps having a cinema camera like this from the get-go might be easier for that transition on a later stage. Now in this video I'm going to concentrate more on the Komodo X, but this is not a review of the camera. If you want to watch a good review, you can see any of the plenty of good reviews out there. This is more of my perspective on this camera and how it could be potentially used on a wedding, at least for my use case, and some cons and pros that I can see about this camera. I'm gonna start with the cons. Weddings are fast-paced events when things cannot be repeated, and the Komodo camera is actually designed for a bit more slower approach to filmmaking, you know, where things are planned and it's a bit more organized, for a bit more controlled environment in general. For example, us filmmakers who film on these kind of cameras are used to that when you turn the camera it takes just a couple of seconds for it to turn on. However, the Komodo takes, I actually don't know how much, I'm gonna put here exactly how much it takes the Komodo X to turn on, but that's too long. Even if it's like 20-30 seconds, that's eternity when it comes to a wedding. Also, many videographers on a wedding day actually rely on autofocus. Again, because this is a fast-paced event and things are happening fast, people are moving, people are going in and out of focus. So autofocus cameras and autofocus lens is actually very, very useful. Now, the Komodo X has decent autofocus, but is not as reliable as it could be. However, I did hear that there is a new software update coming up, so maybe autofocus improvements are on the way. The camera is actually quite a bit more heavy. If you're used to something like this, that will be very, very heavy camera. And if you want to shoot handheld, or if you want to just generally carry this camera around all day, it can become very difficult throughout the day, especially if you think that you have to rig this camera with a monitor, with a battery, etc. The weight of the camera and the autofocus are actually not cons for me particularly. I don't mind that. I shoot manual focus most of the times. What might come as a surprise to many of us is the file size. This is a 6K raw footage and the files are huge, and this is a massive con, pun intended. Price is next on my list of cons. Of course, I already mentioned that there's a huge discount and the camera is way more affordable, but it's still quite expensive. $7,000, it's still very expensive for a camera, considering it doesn't have a monitor, battery, SD cards, etc, etc. And if you do want to rig it the best way possible with their own monitor, which attaches just with one cable, and other premium accessories like this, it becomes quite expensive. I'm just not sure how much it's worth it for a wedding. Probably what is the biggest con for me is the black shading. I think it takes about 21 seconds to black shade the Komodo X, which is again eternity for a wedding day, and you're supposed to black shade when you change temperature drastically, and that happens quite a lot on a wedding day. For example, often we have to shoot outside in the scorching heat, and then immediately you have to go inside where the AC is blasted. But enough bad talk about this camera, let's move to the good stuff. And I'm gonna start with the biggest pro of this camera, and that is that it shoots in 16-bit RAW with close to 17 stops of dynamic range, which is amazing. On a commercial music video or a film, you can actually control the light and you can adjust to your camera. So if your camera doesn't have the best dynamic range, you can adjust that by adding more light. But on a wedding day, you don't have control on the light, and most of us don't use any lights on the wedding day. And I do love backlighting my subjects. I do love shooting against the window. And sometimes, like on my last wedding, for example, the ceremony was under a tree. So it means when I have to film the groom and the bride, the background is gonna be blown out. So the latitude of this camera will allow me to actually have a good exposure and not have overexposed highlights, which again, I hate overexposed highlights. For number two, I'm gonna put compact size. Yes, I did mention already that the camera is big, but it's bigger than these cameras. However, as a cinema camera, it's actually quite small. I believe it's the smallest and lightest cinema camera that you can buy at the moment. I'm not including the Blackmagic pocket cameras because they're not the same type of body. The Pic 6, the FX6 and Nikon Infinity are all heavier than this camera, and that's without being rigged. I believe the Pic 6 is about 500 grams heavier, which is about 1 pound in Unicorn units. So for people like me who wants to shoot handheld and also have a monopod and using monopod throughout the day, I think it's gonna be perfect. I can switch between them very easily. And also for people who use gimbals, that would be probably the, not only, but the best camera to mount on a gimbal, if we talk about cinema cameras, of course. The fact that you can film up to 80 frames in 6K, I think it's very useful and interesting. I do film mostly on 50 frames per second, yes, I'm one of those people, but sometimes I do crave a bit of an extra slow motion, especially when the shot is just extra magical. For example, once I had this child who was playing with balloons and I was on a 135mm lens and I went down to 1080p to take the shot because it was just so magical. The camera has a wide range of anamorphic support, which is very useful for me. I personally want in the future to film weddings with anamorphic lenses, and even though the aspect ratio of the sensor is DCI, that doesn't bother me as much because on the lenses I want to film, which are 1.5 squeeze, this works perfectly. And of course I have to mention the build quality of the camera. After all, this is RED and they're building these cameras to last. They're building these cameras to be out there filming in the harsh conditions. If you invest in this camera, it's more likely that it will survive you, for the foreseeable future. After all, the perfect camera doesn't exist. In my personal mind, every person should have 3 different cameras. These 3 cameras will make the perfect kit and not the perfect camera. Now, one of these cameras is actually a cinema camera, and the RED Komodo X, it's up there into the best option for cinema cameras. It has one of the best images on the market, it has pro cinema features, anamorphic support, as I said, which is quite important for me, and it's durable. All the different cons I mentioned are actually quite easy fixes, and for the Blackshading, which is the biggest con that I see, is actually fixed by the second camera that everyone should have in their kit, which is a hybrid style all-rounder camera which has autofocus, stabilization and stuff like this. However, I'm still not sure if this is actually a good investment if you're gonna use this camera solely for weddings. It is quite expensive, but some of the best cameras out there, even the hybrid ones, are still up there to the $5,000–6,000. On top of my list for hybrid cameras are the Z8, the Canon C70 and the Canon R5 Mark II, which are also very expensive cameras. So the price difference is not as much, but the Komodo you do have to rig extra and that can become super pricey. I did watch a video of Brandon Washington this morning where he said,
don't necessarily think about the price of the camera, because you want to really look at a camera more so from the sake of what can it do for me and how is it actually going to benefit me as a creator. And when you can afford it, then all those things remain true.
But again, I think you can buy cheaper cameras if you're going to use them solely for weddings and actually going to be more useful for you. With that being said, if you do want to transition eventually into other type of filmmaking, or if you already film weddings and also documentaries, or weddings and music videos, or commercials, films, whatever, I think this is a perfect camera for you. Since we're talking about a RED camera, here's today's fact. A football team, or a soccer team for the Americans, that wears RED kits actually plays better. Do what you want with that fact.